Ambassador Beth van Schaack has joined us. I'm assuming that we're okay to be recording, Ambassador.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. No, I know your life is unpredictable and things are happening at a crazy pace in your office and with your responsibilities. Everybody, this is Ambassador Beth van Schaack. As you know, she is the lead in the U.S. government on ad hoc war crimes tribunals. Boy, is it complicated, this question, because there are all sorts of reciprocal things that we need to keep in mind. There's a big topic, of course, in the news about frozen Russian funds in Western banks. Should the interest be used to assist Ukraine and to help rebuild? In fact, should the principal of those monies be taken? The fear that some other country would do it to us in the future is the reason there's some hesitation. Ambassador, welcome and happy Monday morning.
Yes.
Uh,
Thank you. It's
yeah.
10 o'clock. I'm already about 10 minutes behind, so that never bodes well.
No, it does. It does. It shows you've been, as we used to say, doing the Lord's work. But I'm non-denominational here, Ambassador. Good to see you, and we know you're busy, and we will value anytime you can give us. Where do we stand? We were just chatting before you came in about the declining interest, it seems, by the Western media, at least the American media, on the situation in Ukraine. We know why. It's Gaza, Israel, it's Yemen, it's pirates off the coast of Somalia. It's a terrible situation in Sudan. It's everybody I know is discouraged and depressed. Are you?
Yeah, it is difficult to see the fact that our Congress is frozen now when it comes to supplemental funding for Ukraine, while we know that the need is still very great. And it's not just Ukraine and Russia, it's sort of Russia's role in the world and their efforts to impose their value system and their system on multiple countries in the region, of course, starting with Georgia. But even before that, we saw really unhelpful involvement in the Syrian conflict. And so it's so important that we support Ukraine in their efforts to defend not only their territorial integrity, but also, of course, the whole system of the UN Charter, which is premised on the fact that states are entitled to sovereignty and entitled not to be invaded by their larger neighbor who used to be the colonial power. So it is difficult. I think there's just a general, everyone's feeling very overwhelmed with the state of the world right now, with multiple crises happening all over the place, and the Middle East again on the headlines. So that said, I have had some conversations, and it does seem like we are moving towards a resolution on the budget front. So I'm very hopeful. I know, very hopeful in that regard. In part because also tied up in the budget is my own salary because the government is not currently funded. So, all of this is part of a giant negotiation within Congress. So we shall see. We shall see.
Yes. Can you, and on that, first of all, I should point out one of our guests today, one of our team members, is working in the Ukrainian embassy in Georgia. You mentioned Georgia. So we have people, we have a growing dynasty here in this intrepid small group. Can you talk about funding, and we have to talk about that. Can you explain what a continuing resolution is? I can try to, but you can do it better than I can. You say you're not
I
funding.
can't, I don't fully understand it either, but normally if we were a normal government, we would have a budget that would fund us through the fiscal year. And then at the end or close to the end of that fiscal year, you would do another budget that would again, continue to fund. When you can't reach a resolution on that budget, they pass what's called a continuing resolution, which temporarily funds the government at the same level as it was funded in the prior period. So it means that I continue to draw a salary, we have money for travel, all of that stuff continues. But it's just very uncertain, and it makes it difficult to plan because, for example, I'm trying to do some hiring and I don't know if my budget will be cut or not in the next round. And so because I have no visibility, everything is sort of on hold. So it's no way to run a government, I can say. I do not recommend running a government this way, but that's where we are. And so we're hopeful that we'll get resolution
I
soon.
think most Americans are embarrassed or ashamed. We never, ever have a budget on October 1st. I worked in the US government for 25 years. I think once we had a budget during that period. We know that in fact, we should feel free to talk about domestic US issues. And of course, we want to hear mainly about the chance of having war crimes tribunals. But you say we're near a resolution. We know that President Biden very dramatically 2 days ago said, okay, I agree. I will close the southern border or whatever he said. He was basically surrendered to the Republican Party and said, okay, whatever you say, because we need the funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for our domestic obligations. You say that there may be some sort of resolution. Is this something you feel? Or do we have, is it anything that can be said publicly?
I have no personal insights into this. It's
Yeah,
not my world. I
yeah.
rely upon our experts here, but it does, I'm just reading from the news and what I'm hearing, it sounds like they are really working hard. And there may be some few lingering things that need to be resolved. So, very hopeful.
Yeah.
I think we will, obviously, it will get resolved at some point. The question is, do we like the levels? But I am hopeful. And there's so many supporters of Ukraine who really understand what's at stake. So there will be funding for Ukraine. And the question is, at what level and for what purposes?
And how quickly, right? Because the needs are immediate.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
but in the meantime, the justice work is continuing. And so, and part of which is because it's already been pre-funded by earlier supplementals. So in that regard, there's no, there's continuity when it comes to the justice work.
Well, let's switch over to your direct world. We have something like 100,000 cases being adjudicated by the Ukrainian Justice Ministry. How in the world will they ever take on that volume of work? And to what extent are they doing this with the advice? I know there's an arrangement with Georgetown law faculty, and a formal arrangement. How involved can the United States be, or should they be, in resolving or adjudicating these many cases?
Yeah, so obviously the Ukrainian prosecutor general is in the lead when it comes to justice. All of the war crimes and other atrocities that are happening are connected to Ukrainian territory. So technically there is jurisdiction there, but as you know, there's been I think it's now more than 125,000 incidents that have been identified as possible prosecutable war crimes. So that's not to say there are now 125,000 open cases that are being actively prosecuted, but these are incidents that could be prosecuted. And so now the challenge within the prosecutor's office is to prioritize those and determine which ones have sufficient evidence to be able to move forward in a case. And there's so many different questions. Who is the defendant, right? Who is the responsible perpetrator? Do we have access to that person? Or are they sitting in Russia somewhere such that it would have to be an in absentia trial? Are there witnesses who can speak to these particular incidents? Did they see something? Did they see who was responsible? Did they themselves experience violence? Or was this just a rumor? Do they have sufficient physical evidence? Can they get access to the territory where the crime maybe is alleged to have happened? We know that many parts of Ukraine, including around the front line, are either under Russian occupation or under Russian control. And so that means that investigators can't necessarily go in, collect testimony, collect physical evidence, take photographs, none of that. And so these are all the various factors that the prosecutor general has to consider in determining where to put limited prosecutorial resources. So this is where our project comes in. With the United Kingdom and the European Union, we created the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group. So these are a series of experts who have worked on these cases in other contexts. who are helping the Ukrainian prosecutors and investigators to go through all of these potential cases and determine which ones should be brought, and then to help bring the strongest cases possible. Many of these experts used to work at the war crimes tribunals in the Hague. So they worked on the former Yugoslavia, they worked on Rwanda, they worked on Cambodia, all of these various places where they had international tribunals doing war crimes and crimes against humanity cases. So they have very strong expertise here. So one person in particular who worked on the siege of Sarajevo in the former Yugoslavia is now helping the prosecutor general think about how to prosecute the siege of Mariupol. That's just an example
Oh
of the
dear.
type of support
Yeah.
that we're trying to provide the prosecutor general.
Yeah.
It's all experts. We're not doing the work ourselves because we don't have the executive power to operate in a criminal law way in Ukraine, but we can support the work that Ukrainian experts are doing themselves.
So I know there's a formal arrangement between, as I mentioned, between the Ukrainian Justice Ministry and Georgetown Law School. Are you at all involved in that? I believe the idea is to help them with the case management issue, which is so overwhelming. And I believe Georgetown is helping them figure out how to, as you say, prioritize, how to make some sense of so many cases. Do you ever get involved with the Georgetown Law School Ukrainian Justice Ministry relationship? Are you involved in that?
Yeah, we funded it. We funded it and we created it. So our office created the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group.
Okay.
Georgetown is the primary implementing partner. So we have given Georgetown a large grant to do this work, basically. And then Georgetown is working with partners that the UK is funding and that the EU are funding. And together they form the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group. Clint Williamson, who used to hold my position as ambassador at large, is the lead implementer. He is a longtime expert in this field. He worked in Kosovo and in the former Yugoslavia, multiple different places. So he's the lead implementer, but then working side by side with other organizations that the EU and the UK have funded. So together, we're funding this effort.
Yeah, and Clint Williamson, I believe, is a member of the law school at Georgetown, I think. Can you explain to us, this is a crucial but very complicated structure. Can you explain to us between the ICC, the ICJ, and ad hoc? Can you give us a thumbnail on those three entities and which one is going to be the most likely to be useful in this case? Ad hoc, perhaps?
Well, at this point, all three are on the table. So we know that the International Court of Justice, which is the world court sitting in The Hague, it's a creation of the UN Charter. So it's essentially the judicial branch of the United Nations, if we can call it that. It has only jurisdiction over states. It does not have jurisdiction over individuals, and it does not have criminal jurisdiction. So it can only adjudicate state responsibility. Ukraine has now 2 matters against Russia before the World Court. The first matter dates back to the original invasion in 2014. They have triggered jurisdiction under 2 treaties, the Financing of Terrorism Treaty and the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And the argument is that Russia, by virtue of supporting non-state actor separatists in the Donbass, is essentially financing acts of terror under the Convention on Terrorist Financing. And by virtue of its discrimination against ethnic Tatars and other local communities within those areas, is breaching the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So that's a case, it's an old case, it's still ongoing. The newer case was filed under the Genocide Convention. And the argument here is a little bit of a clever one. It's not necessarily that Russia is committing genocide in Ukraine, but you can imagine those arguments emerging during the life of this proceeding before the ICJ. Rather, the question presented now is Russia using claims that Ukraine is committing genocide against Russian-speaking citizens as a pretext for launching a full-scale invasion. So that matter is also before the ICJ. The ICJ has found jurisdiction in a preliminary ruling, and in a second ruling, it has imposed what are called provisional measures. These are essentially measures that are in place during the life of the suit until the court gets to the merits and issues a final judgment. And so among those provisional measures are the order that Russia cease military operations in Ukraine, which of course Russia has not done. So Russia is now in breach of a court order from the International Court of Justice. No one expected Russia to comply with those orders, but nonetheless, Ukraine has in its hands a judicial order that Russia is supposed to cease military operations. So that's the International Court of Justice, state responsibility, no criminal jurisdiction, only questions of reparations, essentially, is what the court will order. So now we shift to the International Criminal Court, also in The Hague, which is the Center for International Justice. This institution has criminal jurisdiction over individuals. It has no in absentia jurisdiction, which is to say they need to have the defendant in custody. So the prosecutor opened a matter very quickly after the full-scale invasion in February 2022. In addition, a number of states, more than 40 at this point, have referred the matter to the court. So there's a lot of political support for the court operating in this context. The prosecutor has now sought 2 arrest warrants, one for President Putin himself and one for Maria Lvova-Belova, who is the Children's Rights Commissioner. And I'm putting that in quotes because she is in many respects the architect of the policy of taking Ukrainian children from Ukraine into Russia and putting them up for adoption or into foster care. So the 2 arrest warrants are now outstanding. They exist, and they can be enforced by any ICC state party. But of course, Putin and Lvova-Belova are not going to travel anywhere where they might be taken into custody. And so while they remain in Moscow or in Russia, they remain beyond the reach of the ICC. Now, we had that very interesting incident where the BRICS meeting was supposed to be happening in South Africa. And South Africa is an ICC member state, and so would have been under a treaty-based obligation to arrest President Putin and to transfer him to The Hague. The South Africa was in a very conflicted position, was issuing a lot of really ambiguous statements. It wasn't clear what they were planning to do. Their civil society mobilized and went to the courts. The courts ruled that, yes, as a matter of treaty law, South Africa would be obliged to arrest him. And so in the end, he didn't end up traveling and said that he was in fact too busy to make it to the BRICS meeting. So in a way, it was a tiny victory because it shows that he's constrained by the arrest warrant against them. He's not able to operate as a normal head of state, traveling around, representing his country. But at the same time, he didn't go, and then that was a possibility of bringing him into custody. So the next opportunity might be the next BRICS meeting, which is meant to be in Brazil. Brazil is also an ICC state party. So it remains to be seen whether or not Brazil will create enough ambiguity that Putin will again be afraid to take the risk of traveling and exposing himself to arrest potentially. Well, so that's the ICC. Now, you also asked about an ad hoc tribunal. There are efforts now to create a standing, dedicated tribunal to prosecute the crime of aggression. It would have a very narrow jurisdiction. It would only prosecute aggression. The theory is that you have Ukrainian courts, you have the ICC, and you have courts in third states all throughout Europe and elsewhere, including the United States, that can prosecute the war crimes and other crimes. And so very few of those courts have jurisdiction over aggression. The ICC, for example, does not have jurisdiction over aggression in this particular matter. So the proposal was put forth to create an ad hoc dedicated tribunal. We are still negotiating what that looks like, and where it would be created. It's probably something involving the Council of Europe. But in the meantime, there is an international center for the prosecution of aggression that is in The Hague and is already operating. This is like a prosecutor's office, an international prosecutor's office. Many states have sent their personnel to the center, including the United States. We have a very senior international prosecutor who's contributing to the work of the center. They're preparing indictments and other analyses on the commission of the crime of aggression. And those analyses will then be transferred to and shared with this new ad hoc institution when it is established. So we're building this institution over here, but in the meantime, investigations are ongoing. So that, I think, is the state of play at this point.
So many questions, Ambassador. First of all, this international center, I admit I haven't heard about this. Will it have jurisdiction? Will it have the powers of imposing its findings?
No, it is only really a kind of a research office now. So it can do the research, it can interview, it can collect evidence, it can talk to experts, it can build a chain of command, it can map the invasion and how it happened, all of that, but all it can do is research. Only once the tribunal is established will there be a body with some sort of coercive powers. But there are some states that have aggression in their domestic codes, and this new center can also support potential aggression prosecutions in national courts around the world. So basically, it's a group of specialists that are going to try and create dossiers on particular defendants to help speed up the process of prosecuting these cases once there's a court with jurisdiction.
This is so complex because there are international courts, there are national courts, there are ad hoc courts. Very hypothetically, if the government of Italy or Malta or somebody were to conduct an investigation and prosecute, is that possible? I mean, we have so many working parts here. I've heard about the possibility of a Western European country working with the government of Ukraine. That would be yet another model, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely. So that's another pathway to justice. It's cases in third states. And because international crimes have been committed in Ukraine, that gives jurisdiction to all states of the world to potentially prosecute individuals if they have, for example, custody of them, if that's required under their system. So many European states have formed a joint investigative team with Ukraine in order to share information among them in the event that perpetrators are traveling. And we've already seen a few glimmers of justice emerging in these national courts. I can talk about a case in my own system. We have a war crimes statute in the United States. We don't have a crimes against humanity statute, so all we can do is prosecute war crimes. But there is a case that has been opened. There are 3 defendants who are accused of unlawfully detaining a US citizen and torturing that person while in detention. And so that indictment now exists. We don't have custody over the accused, and we do not have in absentia jurisdiction. So we have to seek the extradition of those individuals. Of course, we assume they're now in Russia, and so they're out of reach, but that indictment will exist on the books forever. And so over time, as individuals start to travel or have to flee Russia because suddenly they're no longer in Putin's good graces, or they're tired of everything and they try and escape, then they may become accessible to prosecutors around the world. So absolutely, states in Europe and elsewhere have the ability to exercise jurisdiction under what we call universal jurisdiction when international crimes are at issue, which they are here.
Pardon the levity, but couldn't we invite some of these people for an all expenses tour of Disneyland and get them?
There have been instances when defendants have been lured into a jurisdiction in order to be able to prosecute them. Yeah.
You mentioned the South Africa president, and I'm sure you remember during the Zuma presidency of South Africa, the president of Sudan, who was accused by the ICC, the mechanism was underway, actually did travel to South Africa, and the courts in South Africa said he is arrested, and he stayed for 48 hours until President Zuma overruled the courts. Is that crazy precedent of any help in imagining what might
Actually,
happen?
it went the other way around. So he was invited to South Africa by Zuma and came.
Yep.
And then the courts ruled that there was an obligation to arrest him,
Yep.
Omar al-Bashir. And in the middle of the night, he snuck out of the country, got on a plane, and flew away, and was not able to do the kinds of meetings that he was supposed to do.
I'm assuming.
So the system kind of worked here in that, again, indicted war criminals are constrained in their ability to function.
Mhm.
So there is precedent here. And so we knew that precedent with the Sudan case when South Africa was again considering hosting Putin, and the courts sort of said, we've already ruled on this. If someone has been indicted by the ICC, we have an obligation as an ICC member to arrest him. And so I think that's why Putin decided it was too risky to see whether or not he would get protection or not, and so chose not to.
It's no longer Zuma, it's Ramaphosa. I assumed at the time that Omar al-Bashir left with the advice and assistance of President Zuma, but we don't know that, I suppose. Now, how is your work complicated by the fact that President Clinton signed the Rome Statute in 1999, and one of the first things that George W. Bush did when he came into office was to unsign that agreement? Does this limit the things that you're able to do?
Bit. I mean, we're not a party, and so we don't have any cooperation obligations. We don't attend meetings of the assemblies of states parties. There's certain privileges that we don't have, but nothing about that state of affairs prevents us from assisting the work of the court voluntarily, which we do on a regular basis. So we are helping with the Ukraine matter, we're helping with the Sudan matter, and that includes everything from diplomatic support to operational support on the ground, to information sharing. There's a whole range of ways we can support the work of the court, even as a non-party state. And so my office is in charge of managing that relationship and looking for ways that we can advance justice where the court has been activated, as it has in this particular case. So it doesn't hinder us. It just means that we're not under any legal obligation to do so. It's all because we want to support these efforts at justice.
Because the optics here, it does seem funny to Europeans, I think, and to others, that the U.S. cooperates so fully with the ICC as a non-member. We encourage them, we assist them, but we've refused, historically, we've refused to be members. I'm sure that the current administration would undo that if it were politically possible. And I encourage everybody else, please, this is very complicated. I need to know, what do you need to know in order to get a sense of this? We'll move to Maria Znamenuk in just a second, but Ambassador—
Can I suggest quickly, I only have about like 7 more minutes, so maybe I can collect a couple of questions and then try and respond.
Okay, one from me and one from Maria. Mine is, you mentioned Sudan. And what we've tried to do in these spring sessions is to go beyond, geographically, beyond the current conflict in Europe. Sudan is a terrible, terrible situation that gets almost no press coverage. So my question would be, who would be prosecuted in that? Would it be the 2 warlords who are now conducting the conflict? And then let's get Maria's question then.
Thank you for this opportunity. My question would be related to the fact that you mentioned that there is a court order for Russia to cease military operations. But is it equivalent to retrieving its troops from Ukrainian territory, or can Russia technically just stop all of military action and say we are obliging with the order, we are in the good here?
That's a much better question than mine. Take that one first.
Okay.
Uh, uh,
Maria, I have to go back and read the opinion. It's a very good question and a very subtle question. I don't remember whether it calls for the withdrawal of the troops. I'd have to go back and look at that again. And I'm sorry, I don't have a more precise answer for you. I just don't remember how specific the court was. But these are binding, these orders, technically, under the UN Charter. But of course, Russia has no intention of complying at this stage. So, but it does build a groundwork for Ukraine to be able to ask for reparations, which was where we started our conversation earlier today. On Sudan, you're exactly right. I mean, it's a horrific situation between the Sudanese armed forces and this sort of breakaway group, the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. And the RSF is now kind of winning on the battlefield and controls large portions of Sudan and is committing breaches everywhere in which those troops exist. The International Criminal Court got jurisdiction way back in, I think, 2005, when the Security Council referred the matter of Darfur to the court. That referral was open-ended from the perspective of time, and so that referral still exists. The prosecutor has indicated that he is conducting a current investigation on violence in Darfur with respect to the current warring parties. And the United States and others have welcomed that move. In fact, he's briefing the Security Council like right now, as we're speaking. He's in Chad, briefing the Security Council on his current investigation. Now, that doesn't include all of Sudan. It's limited to just Darfur. And so the ICC will have partial jurisdiction over current events. We announced today, in fact, like 40 minutes ago, that we have a reward for information for the arrest of an individual that was a part of the earlier violence in Darfur in the 2000s. So those people are still at large, the most responsible. And the current violence has brought renewed interest in the role of the ICC, and states are looking for ways to be able to promote justice through the ICC.
And we should point out the cynicism of the Russian Federation in supporting both sides of this conflict, both the regular forces and the rebel forces. This seems unconscionable, but it seems as if Russia very cynically is thinking, if we support them both, we cannot lose, something like that. Yeah, I know you have just a minute or two left. Sovereignty. No international group, not the UN, not the Security Council, not the ICJ, not the ICC, none of these institutes have sovereignty. Can we ever imagine a world where they would?
I mean, if by sovereignty you mean like control over territory, no. I mean, the closest we have is the EU forming a kind of a union of individually sovereign states. If by sovereignty you mean the ability to exercise like coercive enforcement jurisdiction in states, we're still very much dependent on state cooperation and state consent. So ICC investigators cannot go into Sudan without Sudan's permission, nor can they go into Ukraine without Ukraine's permission. Now, those two states are very different. Ukraine has welcomed the ICC prosecutors. They're creating a field office in Kyiv so that they can have their investigators there on the ground, ready to move quickly when events change. Whereas Sudan has been much more resistant. It has allowed them in, but they are keeping them a little bit at arm's length. So our system, such as it is still very much dependent on state cooperation and consent. And the idea of sovereignty is often a shield from scrutiny and accountability rather than enabling accountability or justice.
Yeah, I asked the question because many states, including Russia and possibly including the United States, if they were told by an international court, you must do ABC, they in most countries, the government would the sovereignty would trump the international jurisdiction, and I believe that's unfortunate for the purpose of prosecution.
Yeah, we're a very immature system when it comes to any kinds of judicial pronouncements by international courts. It's still dependent on the willingness of the state to comply. And there's really no way, unless the Security Council backs the court, there's really no way to impose or to force compliance with a judgment. It's a very immature system.
Ambassador, I know your time
Thank you.
is go up. Let's stay on the line, Ilya and others. Let's see what we can. To me, this is all very daunting, very challenging, and frankly, very confusing. We thank you
Yes.
for being in the middle of this and
Thank you for
doing
including me.
great things.
Apologies for joining late. Best of luck with your program, and thanks for including me in your
Thanks,
class.
Ambassador. We're really grateful. Thank you.
Bye.